They have
How
to
does-
sign consent.
I have a signed consent for every kid on the Lexington team that they can be in media.
And the kid themselves can't consent. It has to be parental.
Right.
Wow.
But
Yeah,
that-
so we'll just make every kid that comes to the Harvard tournament sign a parental permission slip to be recorded.
Well, Harvard has
I'm sure Dallas is just itching to enforce that policy.
Really
Well,
wants to
Harvard
take that
has
on.
an additional rule that you can't use images of the Harvard campus without
Ah.
Harvard's
Yeah.
permission, so you can't report at Harvard for
Oh,
other
and they will
reasons.
sue you with all their $28 billion if you do too. They will absolutely go.
Well,
But
but,
if you put
but that would
something
only
to
mean
cover
if
up
you
their
posted it
campus.
someplace. So that just means you
Using
can't
that
post a
label
YouTube
Harvard
video.
in an educational context sets off their radar like nothing else because
Oh, really?
everybody does that.
But so that just means you can't put the video on YouTube. But if you
Right.
needed to resolve a clipping incident,
It's
you could do it.
technically illegal because you would possess a recording of a Massachusetts minor.
That part I get. I meant
Yeah.
the Harvard part. The
Oh,
Harvard.
yeah.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So we can't allow any.
So there's no enforcement of clipping.
Not
I mean,
that
it's
you can
arbitrary.
Well, it
Yeah.
can't be a recording.
It can't be a
Right.
recording.
So-
not the ordinary way. Yeah.
No, I don't. But here's the follow-up question there. We happen to know that because we coach in Massachusetts. How many other states have similar
Lots.
minor wiretapping laws that
Well, a
people
lot of
just haven't
states, yeah.
investigated?
California
And we only know
has
it 'cause I was the
against
state
that,
president
actually.
for a while, and we had to put it into our rules on the advice of our lawyer. There was a total accident. Nobody sought it out.
Right.
You know.
But I think if every state knew their state rule, and
Right.
then you could sort of go
Yep.
from there. But,
Right.
yeah.
But so if there's a best practices document provided that says, you have to use an audio recording, whatever, there has to be an exemption, or that would be the type of thing that we would have to exempt because we can't do the recording.
Can't mandate illegal activity.
Well, or you could. I mean, I kind of made it as a joke, but honestly, if Texas has a similar rule, this is important enough that I would say if you want to participate in our tournament, you have to get your parents to sign a consent form that says that you can be recorded. In fact, I think it's also interesting that you bring that up though, because the NDCA procedures actually say you can be recorded because we consider this a public activity, and so there's no. And so we have something that could be in violation of state law in Utah. Our tournament goes around and so it's one thing for at my tournament to put into my invitation, when you come here you can be recorded, and the sports thing, it got me too, because I just thought, well, they put our sports team on TV, but then again, maybe they make those kids sign releases, and the NFL does that. They make those kids sign those releases, and
And the TOC makes you sign a
TOC
release
does
there
that
too.
too.
The new TOC packet has the video release.
Yep.
Yeah, that's been there for like 3 years now. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Is
why it was
another
on the street.
consideration also sort of like, I'm even thinking just like, like classic debate arguments, right? Like I can imagine a number of people that don't want videos of them saying that the state is like terrible, like be anarchists just like floating around the internet.
Yeah, I've
you know.
always thought that we should scrub and anonymize the wiki. We should keep it, but we should remove names because those kids run for senator. You know how stupid
Right.
things like that.
But also,
becomes.
if there's
the
this mandatory-
debate coach is like the disclosure wiki.
Yeah.
But if there's this mandatory, you can be videotaped kind of thing, I can imagine students saying, look, I want to go be president one day, and so I don't want there to be a tape floating around of me saying like this.
And that does
Who thinks that the problem with clipping outweighs your desire to run for president someday, and you're embarrassed of your arguments that might come up against you? I guess I'm not. Should I be more sympathetic to that? And/or I don't know. I guess I'm just not sympathetic to that. In the A, make better arguments. B, in your future, can you not explain the context of debate? Like, yes, those things are. I was participating in a debate. Debate is an activity where we test out ideas, and I said a lot of crazy things. I mean, I don't know.
Well, I think the
you
problem with
can't
clipping.
anticipate what will look crazy in 25 years.
Right, like Malthus. Okay, people just read Malthus all the time. And now it's like this person's saying a bunch of Africans should die.
Yeah.
People
Well,
were
think
saying
about
that.
it.
People
There
would
are
not-
plenty of things that were acceptable to say in 1990 that would appall all of us right now, right? And so.
But how many people in this room think that clipping
I think
clipping outweighs that?
I agree.
Very well.
And it's a public activity, and it happens in a public
I
space.
think
And
of it more in terms of the wiki.
the same thing,
Yeah.
and also like the sports thing. Does that mean that? But if a newspaper reporter shows up, they can take pictures, right? But no sound.
It's all
okay.
the sound.
All right.
So what if? Sorry.
I'm sorry, I coach basketball too. And we have a videographer that comes and records our games. It's noise, it's sound.
Well, actually,
It's
I
the
think
entire
that'd probably be
game.
okay because the wiretapping law in Massachusetts is specifically audio recordings, and if you're doing a football game, you can't hear them talk. So there's actually no content there that you're recording.
Yeah, but
But
Do
it's
they
more
bring a
about-
boom
no,
mic
but
to your
in-
games, though?
when we're in the gym playing basketball against
Yeah.
another team, you can hear. Now they can cut out the
Right.
sound if you so choose.
And it's not
But when we
serious.
get the video, we don't.
But
cut
I
out the
think
sound.
Massachusetts' law is unusually strong and harsh in that regard. Like
Wow.
I've read stuff that, like, for instance, you can't tape police because it violates their audio recording rights. You know, it's, you know, that kind of thing. It comes up a lot.
What were you saying,
So,
Paul?
Oh, well, just that. So, I think definitely clipping is a huge problem. So you should be able to record the debates. Maybe there's a stipulation about not reproducing those things without the consent. Like,
Sure,
don't make them
sure.
sign something that says you can have this
Yeah.
and you can do whatever you
And
want
it's
with it, but
smeared
instead
all
over too,
you
yeah.
can use this for the purposes of making sure we're not clipping.
Right.
Because it is a huge problem. But
and not to delete it after the round unless you have
Yeah.
consent. Right.
yeah.
I also 100% agree that clipping is a huge issue and that we should deal with it. I just think that we need to be aware that there's something.
No, I appreciate that for sure. Okay, so anything else on our Council of Tournament Directors kind of general stuff before we move into MPJ stuff that overlaps a little bit with that business?
What was the rest of the
MPJ?
agenda out of curiosity?
Oh yeah, so
Yeah.
basically kind of what we decided was that we should have some bullet points of things that we want to open discussion points with, in particular, maybe even write up some of the kind of preliminary documents for sections of best practices, with the overriding theme being transparency, that we would like it if tournament directors agreed to sign on to the best practices, but the document is inherently created as my invitation could be replaced by I adhere to the guidelines set by the high school council of tournament directors with the following exceptions.
Right.
And our bullet points were independent entries,
Yep.
MPJ, how are we going to use it at our tournament? How is it going to be implemented? You know, how does that interact with judge diversity? Those kinds of things. The idea of a student advocate. The code of conduct, which is one that we definitely put in the, hey, we need to think about this a lot, we need to talk about this a lot, and we have another discussion group set aside where that's another issue that we want to talk about, but that it's, at some point that probably is where this group wants to go, that would be something under what we'd like to see happen. Disclosure, school, this whole notion of who can represent our school at a tournament, and whether or not a tournament should have a rule that you not only have to represent your school, but somebody who works for your school has to show up. And we talked through, and I think this falls in that area of where this is one of those that we need to really flesh out a little bit more about what we think those standards should be. But there should be yeah. But we talked about.
Yeah.
We talked about why couldn't you just pay him $1? Like, you have to work for the school,
We've
so
talked about that.
and so
Yeah.
we kind of talked through some of those things
Yeah.
and the difference between national tournaments and local tournaments that are one day, and we let parents do it. We kind of but to kind of get back to our bullet points, then we talked about clipping, and then we talked about judge professionalism. Then we talked about how we're going to kind of distribute information.
Could I add
Yeah.
the possibility of looking into what a safe and healthy tournament schedule is?
Yeah, sure.
That's become more and more of a concern of mine, that children and I are being asked to operate on 5 hours of sleep and
Yeah.
watch, and that's not very good.
Burns out coaches
Right.
to an
Well, and it's-
incredible degree, and it's not healthy for
It's
kids.
the libertarian paradox too. If you let the market decide, the market just maximizes debate, and if there's not some sort of authority that reins that in, there's always an incentive to add more, because that attracts people to your tournament who aren't thinking ahead.
We want to
So
talk about
it's-
that for a little bit.
So,
Well, maybe this is just because I came from that model of where I didn't, when I was, 23, and I spent 80 hours a week working on debate, and I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. I love my life. And now I have 2 kids. I have a real full-time job that isn't just traveling to debate tournaments, and I think,
the alarm goes off and you're like, oh god.
maybe a leave on Thursday night and come back on Tuesday and then sleep really late on Wednesday and then repeat is not the best for anybody, even if it seemed like it was fun at the time. And
that Tuesday to Wednesday is 90% of the sleep you get all week. Right?
and
So,
and that creates an activity that's dominated by young people who are and that by nature they're not by nature, but the tendency to be a little bit less concerned about professionalism, a little bit less concerned about other things, about the health of the activity 15 years from now instead of 15 minutes from now. So that's my preview. And then, but I kind of like the schedule is the schedule of 6 prelims and elims, is that like better? I mean, I think the 7 prelims and 8 prelim tournaments that we go to are just insane. I think that is like a clear threshold of, in high school debate, those tournaments are not good. Does anybody run a 7-round tournament? Or I was just gonna say, does everybody agree, or?
No, I agree with that. I also think that there shouldn't be more than 4 debates in a day.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, there's no reason why you need 4, even if you're clearing to doubles. Like,
right.
I mean, there's no situation. If you run a major tournament and you can start, if it's a Saturday, Sunday, Monday tournament, you shouldn't ever have to have a 5-round.
I wouldn't specify it like that because.
I agree, but I'm just saying, I'm saying for policy debate. Like, LD seems to be able to get through things pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But
when we start to sink a flood.
right, but Jesus Christ, like NBA used to be brutal. I mean, now that it's a 3-round, 3-day tournament, it's, UT. I mean, they might be the exception to the rule, because I know they pack in a bunch of debates in 2 days and get out, but God, more than 4 debates is brutal.
Or I think it's the same thing of the ability to opt out and kind of say, okay, we're the Glenbrooks, we have a big field and we think 7 prelims is better than 6 and better than having that extra elim, and or, for example, the NDCA this year, because we're letting 100 teams in and we agree that we're going to clear all the 4 2s, so that means we might have to have that extra debate. But the difference being, then you can tell people in advance, okay, you should plan to stay until Tuesday or whatever, and maybe people think that tournament is worth staying until Tuesday for, and if so, then great, then run that tournament that way. But it actually, even then, I guess, if you have to start to go to partial triples, then you can't get away from that. But I think I agree with that premise. So yes.
I think the way Beats articulated it, which was very good, and I don't know if it's the right number, but he said that every tournament should allow there to be 12 hours off between days or something like that.
Right.
You don't just
no more than a 12-hour day.
You don't just need 7 hours to sleep. You also need time to decompress and get back with your kids and feed them, etc.
Well, can I actually say one thing here on something suggested on?
Yeah.
I think that the idea that tournaments should have time built in where kids can eat and have reasonably healthy food options for kids to eat is important and overlooked a lot.
And if you don't want to provide that at your tournament, fine, but then you have to give people time to get off campus and go and do it.
You need to provide the opportunity.
Right. There needs to either be time provided where people can do that, or there needs to be options for people provided at the tournament that are like healthy meals that people can eat. I think that is a 100% reasonable thing in terms of the health and sustainability of tournaments, because it contributes to what you were saying. How long can people coach in this activity? How much debate can people do? I don't know about anybody else, but it's a lot of kids, parents will say their kids come back just exhausted from debate tournaments. It takes them 2 days to catch up. Well, it takes them 2 days to catch up because they were working functionally a 12, 14-hour day, back to back, plus travel, and then they went right to school. And they were eating,
all of which were sugar. Yeah.
Which is not a really good idea.
Yeah.
Good addition.
So that whole section like tournament health might be a thing.
Right.
I mean, in college, the rule is the last round has to start, 10 hours after the first debate started? Or 12 hours? I think it's 10.
Is that what it's kind of a norm?
Oh, it's kind of a norm in college, and I think probably some council tournament directors think that read at some point. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just thought that was what naturally happened because of the decision time that they built in as a firm.
Which is it 2:45 at almost every tournament now?
Yeah.
And does that get enforced?
Yes.
Very well shot.
Yeah. I can't speak
is
to
that
those, but
does everyone kind of agree that's a good thing, or
people
like it now actually?
people?
Especially with cameras now. I mean,
still enforce it.
there's no evidence scarcity problem. Everybody gets the stuff.
No,
Is
actually,
the
one of
high
things
school
that
one?
college norm that is really good is how well they enforce the start and the stop times.
And
They're much better about it than they are.
Is that? I mean, is 2:45 too long for high school? Does it should be 2:30?
I would say 2:15.
2:15.
I think that's what my tab room says, and I always say
2:15 is
no.
totally reasonable.
I always, but our tournament's unique.
High school
so.
debates take like 15
About
minutes
an
to
hour and
decide.
An hour
They
and
should take an
45
hour.
minutes.
You could also just change the time based on the round. So round 6, you
Yeah.
could get longer decision making.
Yeah.
It's a 6-round
Yeah.
That's
tournament.
true.
And they
Round
don't do the rule anyways,
presets
so.
2:15, round 5 and 6, 2:30, 2:45.
Yeah.
I mean, 2:15 gives you 40 minutes to make a decision.
Mm.
Essentially, right.
That is, if, assuming you are good at running a prep clock, which you should be.
Well, and not for nothing, it also puts a penalty to kids who dick around and make messes in rounds. They're robbing their judges' time, and that's kind of a good thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Has that part? Because I heard this argument made before college started adopting this. Has that worked? I mean, it cuts down on the cigarette breaks. Everybody started to understand. Yeah, you can go to the bathroom before the 1 AR, but that's 5 minutes less. Or if you want to go have a smoke break.
Things move at a faster clip. I mean, they were moving at so much at a faster clip that it was actually kind of weird because Gary had also gotten so good at turning around the pairings that like people found all of a sudden that they were like the dead time where you talk to your friends had vanished. So it was working
Yeah.
pretty all right. You know, you get your ins and outs and what have yous with shuttle mishaps and stuff, but
Right.
it's from when I
It's been
debated in
good.
college or you debated in college.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Gary's turnaround system makes it. I mean, we turned this round around in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
To turn it. It was, and we did the pairing power matching by hand. So.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So it really is, placing judges very nicely and automatically.
I mean, I think one thing about a lot of these schedules is that you have to keep in mind, unlike college debate, not the same person's running tab every time.
Right.
Some tab rooms are faster, some tab rooms are slower. We also don't have as professional judges that will pick up a ballot on time,
Well,
that will turn in the ballot.
Is the issue decision times? Because it seemed, in my experience, it seemed like at tournaments it's judges not showing up
Yeah.
on time, or judges not showing up at all, students not showing up on time.
Tab room computer crashing.
That's a little more rare.
That's happened in the local Georgia circuit.
Oh really?
Is there a way to?
Sometimes.
I can't
Because if
remember.
we're talking about long days, that adds,
It's a college thing.
holds up the whole tournament, and
Oh,
it's 30
there you
minutes,
go.
45 minutes.
Judges not showing up, I think, is the biggest. of
Yeah,
those
I
things.
mean, in high school, it's more likely to happen. I guess here
Look at it in college.
we're experiencing
Yeah,
that
don't blame us.
happening
Look,
right
I'm at the
now.
NDT right now.
Let's not talk about that today.
We'll let that one go.
I will start
For our
names and that
for
goes on
our
page
host,
and-
our host that we are very grateful to,
I think-
hosting and doing all this.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we're gonna ignore that.
I think actually that would be a good section to volunteer Jim Manick to start writing, because a lot of these problems we have far
I
fewer
like
of
that you
them.
just gave Bennett a
Of course, I do it all the
Yeah.
time. Because he's directing a tournament because I told him to. All right, like so fling right into the gap. So because a lot.
Are you talking about the safe and humane schedule?
No, I'm talking about the judge
Yeah,
methods of
judge
getting
show.
judges to show up.
Oh.
Because we have far fewer of these problems in the Northeast, and he is 80% of the reason why. And he has had methods, and he has ways of treating the entire schedule as this holistic thing that he enforces it. And so, if your judges bail on the first elim on this debate, guess what? You're not getting it off the wait list of this.
Oh, I see.
And he's very
Right.
good at maintaining selective vendettas, and they have worked very well. And so I went to Berkeley, and I hear them complaining about judges never showing up in the rate of drop ballots, and it was far higher than anything we've had in years in the Northeast.
That's like he also does the 7 a.m. start, 7:30.
Well, sure, but
Like,
you know,
that
no
is
one's,
the-
he's not going to write that section.
That
He's
is
going to do
brutal.
this.
And we can decide what we want to adopt.
Exactly. Yeah.
Transparency
Use
and
that
all
money.
that.
So
Yeah.
having methods of maintaining
In the state
accountability.
of Georgia, at least for our state tournament, we use what's called a judge bond.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's a separate
NFL
$100
says
check.
Yeah.
Our state tournament's 500.
Wow.
And in theory,
Everything's bigger in
the
Texas.
rule, the agreement, like kind of the fine print is one judge misses one ballot, you lose 500.
Yeah.
And so, and I suspect that's somewhat selectively enforced, but
It's
they
just-
have the
it's a
money,
good ethic,
you
yeah.
know.
Use that money to pay the
Well, the
person
NFL has a
who's
judge
covering
bond, too,
the
right?
extra
Because-
round.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people who, if you have a $50
Yeah.
judge bond, will judge and pick up an extra round for $50.
Yeah.
Yeah. We started doing at the Yale tournament. We pay the judge fee to the judge that picked it up, and we had a line of judges picking
That's
up
what-
ballot.
that's
It
what
was
I'm saying.
great.
Yeah. You have no problem finding
And it was easy to enforce because we just told the judge who owed them the $50, and they went and found it themselves. So it was great. Didn't involve any work.
So, any more bullet points for our council of high school tournament directors or high school council of tournament directors?
I think that's a really good start.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I think it's just a matter of, getting it to the right people.
Right.
getting some stuff written up, and then coming back together at the MPCA.
Should there be a sort of generic, maybe we're all thinking because we're all in debate too long and we've done this too many times, but should there just be a simple generic description of how to pair around and how
I think
maybe.
I think
As a
I think
reference.
our idea on that was at some point we would probably take Jim Minnick's tournament toolkit and move something, and I kind of even I think one other benefit of this approach is if I think because we were talking brought up the idea of should we have a web page, and at some point once we get all this written down we should have a web page, and the more efficient that we make it where people can just go there and how do you run tournaments, click on this link, how do you these are the steps you do, and he has a lot of really good stuff, and I kind of made a joke about how many times do we reinvent the wheel, because we have all these resources. The NDCA website has some of those resources, and he has those, and so I think that in some ways this could be just another place where those resources are, but that's good. If a tournament director knows that they can go to Minnick's website and get that stuff, or they can go to the NDCA and get that stuff, and they can go to our site and get that, and I definitely think that that's something that could easily be, like click here for the, basics of running a tournament or whatever. And I think that's a good idea for sure.
Set expectations for your invite.
Okay.
Something else, but I forgot it. And also a section about conflict policies. What constitutes a conflict and what does not.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
These are all discussions that we've had.
Are these suggested conflicts
In
for
one place or another?
or for coaches?
I was thinking in terms of judges.
Yeah.
Judging.
Oh yeah, that's definitely needed.
Right. Because it's where we leave a lot of that up to other people and get interesting moments. Why am I telling you this?
What was that? What was a big part of that discussion at Wake? What a conflict? What consists of a conflict? What should be a permanent conflict?
Well, right. I mean, there's
Oh, I guess that was a backlash against the Harvard stuff, but yeah.
Right. There were a few teams that, in response to the Harvard point,
Inflicted the other end of the ideological.
Exactly, and so I think they've eased off of that since then.
Well, we wrote it into the rules of the coast. They made a more specific policy,
right?
And so they stopped doing that and just used the press sheet to do it instead. So,
right, because you already get so much
right.
leeway anyway. It was more of a statement that was a factor to help. But the other thing that's been interesting too has been the NDT is the only college tournament where if you pay somebody to judge for you, they can't judge you. At every other college tournament, anybody can judge you even if you're paying them to judge you. I don't know what the general rule in high school is on that.
And actually, I was going to ask a question about that. Is if I said that the norm now is that the tournament hires almost nobody to judge, and that everybody fulfills their commitment, that's what's kind of happened is there's become a market of rounds, and that people will kind of post wherever you post now that you say we need 3 rounds, and then somebody agrees, but the tournament itself doesn't actually hire people to judge.
Rare,
Yes.
Which is, I think, the biggest difference in high school is that.
When you register yourself, you can offer rounds in Tabra, and then
Right.
look at the list, email you, make an arrangement, and then you put it in that way, and that fulfills your.
And that's because the norm in college is not to hire.
That's right.
And so, but also has created this norm, which is, I think, different than high school, which is, if at the end of a tournament I hand you a check and you judged my team, I think high school people frown on that. And so I initially, because I saw just a little bit of that thread, maybe Facebook or someplace, and I thought, what are you talking about? That's insane that you would be able to hire a judge and then and let them judge you. Like that doesn't.
Yeah.
And then, but then I kind of read through and I was like, actually, what this really means is that they should be taken out of the, you can take the check writing out of it. What made the other twist on it was when you wanted to hire for, diversity reasons, and then that I don't know, that made it more complicated. But like I said, in high school right now, it's kind of frowned on. In fact, actually, the NDCA has a very lengthy issue and includes if you are giving this person a ride back and forth to the tournament, and having been somebody who I didn't actually write that section, but I definitely helped edit it and talked about it, and so have to take some responsibility for that. I kind of thought that might be over the line. At the same time, if Pace rolls out of a van and Palmer's there, and then Palmer shows up judging my team, and Pace is on the other side of the room.
Right.
I mean, maybe I shouldn't look at that weird, but I kind of am like, yeah.
Well, especially
I'm not
if
sure I
walk
feel
in
that
and,
great
"Oh,
about
hey
it.
guys,
Hey,
what are we
Palmer,
doing for dinner tonight?"
yeah, how
You
you
know?
how are you getting home tonight? And it's
Right.
like, well, you eating Fogo or you eating Burger King? Well, I guess we'll find out after this debate whether or not, you know. I mean, it's just like,
Yeah.
but I don't know, and I do think maybe a certain part of that is just the more insular nature of the college community.
Well, there's also, I think, a qualitative difference between the fact that our hired judges are 19 and 20 and theirs aren't. So that might be part of it as well. Like maybe somebody
That's
who's
a
a
large
college
part.
graduate, et cetera, can handle that and be a little more neutral.
It is so
Right.
weird in that I cannot ever remember an instance where somebody judged a team that paid them to coach or paid them to judge,
Yeah.
and then somebody else was like, "Oh my god," you know, like ever. I can't even remember
Right.
thinking that it would be a problem or having a conversation with
Well, part of it
anybody
would
else.
be the
who-
mechanism, right?
Yeah.
Because the mechanism in college is you get hired by somebody and nobody knows.
Yeah, that's true.
Whereas the mechanism,
Well,
when we
except-
hire a judge, they show up as Lexington, Braun,
It
this
depends.
judge.
It depends at
Right.
it depends at the tournament actually. For one, if you don't have a team you come with or your commitment's already covered, you will show up as with the other schools
That's true.
sometimes.
Yes. Yeah.
Or you may show up twice sometimes.
Right.
But sometimes it just shows you're from Pittsburgh and you're in from 8, even though you sold 2 to Wake and
Yeah.
you're judging 4 for your school. So, yeah.
That, I think that makes me think about, I'm interested in the kind of college perspective on something that I thought's always been really, really unique and really, really awesome about debate is that, you know, been in debate for 20 plus years, and the number of times I've heard Harvard, you know, Dallas Perkins voted for Dartmouth because he didn't want his team to have to debate Dartmouth's opponents in the next debate. And most people from the outside look at that and just think that's insane. Do you know what I mean? That they would allow that kind of thing to happen. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
But the number, I mean, I'm not saying there's never any stories about that. I'm not saying there haven't ever been rumors about that kind of thing. But for the number of debates that we have, and the kind of, in our world, how important we think those things are, it's shocking how little we think that happens.
Yeah.
Fine.
Now, does that still exist in college? I feel like that's starting to break down a little bit because of the ideology questions, but do people are just like, oh, that's ideology, but it's a different kind of thing, or am I just wrong? I'm misrepresenting the amount of that.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I think that right now the difference in you see a panel and you're like, oh, that panel's going to vote for the K, or oh, that panel's going to vote for the policy stuff. The level of that assumption based on looking at the panel to me in people's attitudes is not greater than it was 5 years ago. People always made predictions based on what they thought the panel would do,
And half the time they would be like, it's going to be a 2-1, and they'd be right, but they'd have it
2 and
exactly
1, yeah.
opposite. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
they're
for
still
sure.
very good at it.
Oh,
Yeah, they
Kelsey's
still make
definitely
those
not.
predictions, but they're wrong enough that.
The main difference I'd say
That
between
judge's definitely not voting on framework.
now and a
Oh,
decade
wait,
ago
she
is
votes like on framework.
you are getting more a repetition of data in the sense that a smaller number of people judge the same debates over and over, and I think that was less true when the algorithm was weaker. So
And those statistics, it was anecdotal, and now you can go to tab room and just be like,
yeah,
Right.
these are the numbers.
every year at our district tournament, I always judge the James Madison and Towson debate. Both of those teams practice leading up to the district tournament for the debate that they will have in front of me at the district tournament. Happens every time. You know,
Nice.
it's predictable, and it's predictable at the nationals once you know who's going to mostly be around on England Day too.
Right. Right.
Okay, any more of our bullet points?
I don't have a bullet point, can I just,
Sure, talk.
I've been fielding a message, stream from Tim Aldretti, who's watching,
Okay.
and I just want
Over
to,
live?
I just want to address one of his concerns.
Sure.
Because
Hi, Tim.
he,
Hey, Tim.
hi Tim, he has a concern about where this came from, who got appointed to do this, where
Sure.
did this sort of generate, et
Our
cetera.
mandate.
Yes, and I will concede, we don't have an official mandate. This is the organic product of conversations that were had at MBA, at Emory, with various coaches, talking about sort of the nature of the way things have been going in debate, and the fact that now is a really nice time for us to have some serious discussions and maybe come up with some solutions. I don't know what any of those are. This is a starting point, and there was a conversation at Woodward that I was not able to be at. There's a conversation here. There are conversations scheduled for the NBCA, for the TOC. I've heard of people talking about having conversations at the NFL. think that all of those are good things, and I don't want people to think that this is some sort of conspiratorial. We are live streaming this so people can comment and be involved and have a say in these issues. I don't think anybody's trying to make large scale decisions that without a mandate here. So I just wanted to throw that out there and let Tim know that he was heard.
And if Aldereti or any of the rest of you have other questions, then I think on the stream you can even put in questions or comments or whatever.
Yeah, just feel free to chat them in.
And you can let us know. But if that doesn't make Aldereti feel better, then
I hope it does.
Please chat
We
the.
love
we hope you feel better, Tim.
Please chat questions in.
Yes.
The overriding idea behind the college tournament directors was simply to put more thought into these questions once and then never have to do it again, right?
You're gonna have to.
And to make it easier for tournament directors so that they don't have to use these policies, but if they agree with them and think that they're a good idea. I mean, I think that depending on when people joined our stream, the biggest thing that we were talking about for the High School Council of Tournament Directors is transparency, so that we can all agree on here's what we think best practices are, and it really doesn't matter who writes it up. We're just going to consolidate all that information, and then tournament directors can put wholesale on their website. We believe that our tournament will be run by these best practices with the following exceptions, and that all we want is to be able to choose to attend tournaments that are clear about. You can have whatever MPJ policy you want. We just want to know what it is going in. You can have, your whatever independent entries policy you want to have, but we want to know who our students are going to be competing against and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the big thing. Okay.
Great.
Anything else? No more bullet points? No more?
I feel pretty good about that.
Okay, cool. So, we have Chris here, so we're going to talk about MPJ a little bit, and just because I don't know what everybody's time stuff is like, and I'm a little bit sensitive to that. I don't know where are you at, Chris, when you have to get back there? What's your? It's
the
7.
start time of the round was 6:15. That was an hour ago, so I actually have about an hour.
I can tell you when rounds are getting out.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So like 8:45, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Power.
That's more than an hour, so I kind of thought if we get to talk for an hour, that's pretty good. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I'll probably leave somewhere in the middle of this.
So
Come and go as you like.
They're like in the 2 NCs right now.
Anything in particular you want to talk about MPJ or say about MPJ? Especially if
I mean,
people are
we
going
had
to
a
leave
really
because
good
I'm going to be here the whole time, so I can pipe
We
down.
had a really good conversation at work about MPJ.
Yeah.
More informative with Lingle sort of leading.
This is what it
the
is.
Charge. I think I'm just curious, as we were at Woodward, about categories and the likelihood of a skew when there's a 6 or 9 category system, and a bigger percentage of 1s and 2s are required, and within those categories. And
What do you mean by skew? I mean,
well, it's just like, let's just say you have to have so many, so many of each category.
right.
Well, let's just say you have to have 6. There's 6 categories, but you have to have, like
Half your judges.
half of your judges have to be 1s and 2s versus
Yeah.
one where like 20% of your judges have to be 1s and 2s.
Right.
I mean, that's what I'm most curious
Right.
about.
Well, I've always thought that that's just basically tournaments trying to be able to go out there and say, oh, you got all 1-1s in this debate, and that actually has no very value whatsoever in MPJ. So I've always, no tournament I've run has ever done that unless I've been required to do so by a tournament director. Because ultimately the purpose of the MPJ system is there's 2, I think, purposes behind MPJ and how it was sold. How it was sold was all about mutuality, right? And the real goal is an even playing field. And so in my opinion, anything that produces an even playing field is good. And then there are potential other side effects, and as long as we can address those side effects without ruining the even playing field, those are good as well, right? And so the most even playing field I think of is that ultimately the way a judge is preferred involves a continuum, right? So the college ordinal pref sheet is the way most people think about judges, roughly speaking. Now, it's almost certainly true that people can't make distinctions between judges, right? They'll be, oh, he's my favoriteest judge ever. She's pretty good, but I couldn't really tell the difference between her and her. And then, there's these 4 judges that are kind of indistinguishable below them, and I would take any of these 6, and then after that, I would take that guy, and so on. And so if that's your sort of background behind it, any tiered system, what a tiered system simply does is make the distinctions between those tiers less resolved, right? And when you tilt like that, I think what you do is you not only have the harm of the tiers, which is some places necessary, but you also have the harm of making it no longer even, right? And so, I haven't actually looked at the win-loss percentages in those debates, which I probably should. I do have a fair amount of data in them. But I would suspect that you get, much less satisfactory outcomes from those debates in various ways. Because what I could maybe do one of these days, and this is really clever actually, now that I'm thinking about it, this is a good idea you gave me. You can compare what people's pref sheets are from previous tournaments versus what they get in the given round. And you can find hidden non-mutual pairings, and we can see what the win-loss record is. So let's say we have a tournament, J random octos bid, that decides to do, 25% ones, 25% twos, and only 10% 3, 4, 5, whatever, right? We could compare results of rounds from your teams in those debates when you were disfavored by a 1-1 pairing that we know because of your other pref sheets would have been a 1-3 pairing had you been given 9 categories that were equal, right? And figure out what your average pref from other tournaments are and compare them against the results. I suspect what you would get is consistently losing those debates, right? Because it's not actually an even playing field. Now, the reason why we deal with the 90%, 90% of why we have the tiers is simply an artifact of the TRPC system, right? The TRPC, when Rich programmed in mutuality, he did it based on just tiers. And so since TRPC has been the dominant platform in high school, that's what we have. And what's funny is policy uses 9 a lot, LD uses 6 a lot, and the reason why is that 9 tiers can't handle double-flighted rounds very well. You try to do 9 tiers and double-flighted rounds, and TRPC just goes kablooey, right?
Can I say one thing there?
Sure.
I think policy only uses 9 really in the Northeast.
Oh, really?
I think that's a Stefan Bryan preference.
Interesting.
More than because I think
I agree
almost
with
every
that,
other
yeah.
tournament that I go to,
Usually 6, right?
it is
Yeah.
6.
I've never been.
One year Emory used it and then went back to the
Yeah.
6
Right.
category.
Correct.
Yeah.
I haven't been to many policy tournaments outside the Northeast.
Yeah, 9 is
so,
9 is a Stefan Bryan preference.
Yeah.
We
It's
use it
also
because that's
just now a Stanford preference.
Oh.
true.
Fair
Stanford,
enough,
Harvard,
That's the
Lexington,
exception.
Lakeland. So,
Right.
but it's
Right.
just to.
So insofar as there's there's a goal of it in my mind, it is to ensure that level playing field, and I think excessively large tiers and also unbalanced tiers, essentially undercuts the purpose of the system. And I think it's mostly marketing. I think it's a tournament director wanting to be able to say we had 98% of 1-1 pairings.
Right.
One of the harms I think that's come up a lot recently about the MPJ system is the overvaluing the 1-1 pairing ultimately, right? And that's something that I've been thinking a lot about how to solve, is that we've created an activity where most of our top debaters, especially because typically speaking in MPJ, we privilege the debates that are in it, and then the debates who are out of it after a couple rounds, when they're not going to clear, they get whoever, right? That our top debaters can go through an entire competitive season without seeing a 3 judge, right? And that can be a problem both with ideology and with quality. I'm on for my MPJ.
You are. For what?
I'm on for an MPJ presentation I was supposed to give.
Okay. We're taking the picture. If you want to be in the picture, that's fine. Okay.
We can give you
I was hoping this
Oh,
was like
no,
a
I really don't have to
even
be in the picture.
You sure?
I'm fine, don't worry. I was in last year's picture squinting because the Utah sun was in my eyes, so I think I can.
So they can
let
Photoshop you.
let that be my legacy.
Hey, Brusky, how are
Can
you?
you just say MPJ bad and count?
How bad?
How bad is it? Well, bad
Yeah,
is something that's
bad.
practiced, right? So I think there are a couple of ideas I've
We
been.
almost sucked him in. Did you see that?
Yeah, it came
We
that
almost
close.
got him.
That
But
close.
he really wants to be in the picture, apparently.
You can come back.
Yeah, that's true. So college started doing ordinals probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I think. I'm not too familiar with the history.
That's about right.
And I think it was largely because of Breshke and Gary Larson designing a computer system that was better at handling it. TRPC just simply wasn't able to. And Rich put it in as a kind of an afterthought, more or less after he had mostly retired as a tournament coach and director himself anyway. So asking him to do a lot of work behind that was, unreasonable. And so I think why college flipped over is because they had 2 tournament directors who had experience with the systems that could handle it. And high school, the learning curve on both Gary and John's system was pretty high, and neither of them ever really took off seriously in high school, and therefore ordinals were always prevented from. I think there's also a perceptual problem in high school and I get this a lot when I talk about the ordinal system, which is, oh God, how could I ever distinguish between the 73rd and the 74th judge, right? And the answer is you don't, right? And so one of the challenge I think with MPJ is that I find there's actually a fair amount of not much understanding of how it works numerically, and there's a fair lack of numeracy among high school coaches because people who are really good at math don't become debate coaches ultimately, right? So a lot of them anyway. So
Few of us.
yeah. So
Georgia, right?
I mean, I'm a computer software engineer, and here I am, right? So, so one of the things I think for posterity's sake and whatever, I think would be helpful is I can explain to you how tab room places judges mutually, and then there was a couple of ideas I had for not abandoning mutuality, but maybe addressing some of these concerns while not harming the central core of mutuality, because building a new tab software, TRPC will not be able to run in some point in the foreseeable future. Microsoft will not support Visual Basic 6 likely in the next version of Windows. They promised they would not in Windows 8. They recanted on that because their customers complained too much. But at some point Microsoft is going to say no, stop, no more. Which means if we keep running TRPC, there will be a tournament 10 years in the future where they will have the only laptop left on earth that can run TRPC. And some kid's going to sit with a big old Coke and say, can I check my email? And everyone's going, no! And that's going to be the end of TRPC right there. So
I think it should die earlier.
So we're building tabroom.com, we're building the cat, we're building these things that can handle debate tabbing in the future. And one of the things I've been trying to think of is how we can be more sophisticated about prefs. So ordinals, you can do an ordinal system the exact same way you do tiers. Okay, you do the ordinal system, everybody ranks the judges 1 through 182, whatever it is. The ordinal system has a couple of advantages. One thing is you do not match people in an ordinal system based on simply their ordinal score, all right? So if I have a pref sheet and I put Shante as my 9th best judge and Mahoney as my 20th best judge and Sarah as my 34th best judge, and somebody else's pref sheet has Shante as their 34th and Mahoney as their 20th, same ranking, and then Sarah's up at the top, right? Mahoney is not necessarily the mutually preferred judge, because what will happen is you get rated within your percentile basis based on how many rounds you are committed for. So you don't get marked as a 20, you get marked as your percentile based on how many rounds are ahead of you on the preference sheet, okay? So if, let's say you three were my ordinal 1, 2, 3, and you're in for 6 rounds and you're each in for 2, somebody else who has you as your ordinal 1, you'll be mutual perfectly with all 3 of them because it's 6 rounds each, right? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So anybody losing? I'm not losing anybody, right? So you rank based, so what's nice about that is it has some accounting which the tiered system does not entirely do of what kinds of judging commitment you're dealing with, not just simply a judge.
Explain that part again about, I get the kind of concept of
Sure.
it. Is there an important part of that I'm missing other than it's not just how preferred I am in this debate, it also is related to how many other debates I have to judge?
It's more related to where your position is in the entire pool of judging.
Okay.
Is what it is,
I
right?
gotcha.
Yeah. So, the ordinal system is not about matching a 90 with a 90. It's about matching a 20th percentile with a 30th percentile, right? And so that's sort of an important distinction to make. So your ratings can look very awkward if you look at the ordinal rating and not know that. You can look at an ordinal pairing and say, that person's 20 marks off, but in fact they're not, right? It's all a matter of the judge burden. And then the computer program that does that is much more powerful. Not even.
There's chairs in that room too.
Yeah, there's a big comfy chair in there. If you want to pull it in. And so, and then the computer program does a much better job of sorting it. What Tabroom essentially does, and it's on my to-do list to look through the details of what Gary's algorithm does, but I'm not sure. I think what Gary's algorithm does, it achieves a similar effect, but it is quicker, it's faster. He's more of an algorithm math guy than I am. What Tabroom essentially does, it assigns a numerical score that penalizes every negative outcome you could want with a judge placement, right? And the user is able to set those scores. So if you're unmutual, let's, even in a tiered system or an ordinal system, Shunte's a 1, Mahoney's a 2, and I have set the penalty for that to be 50, if Shunte is judging me and Mahoney, and I've rated you a 1 and he's rated you a 2, you would get 50 points, right? And if you would also get points for him having rated you a 2, because it wants to prefer higher judges over lower judges. You can have it assign points to a judge who is not meet the tournament diversity criteria. So you can set that a low thing, so it's like essentially a tiebreaker. If there's 2 1-1s, it'll pick the diverse judge, because that came up this year in college policy. You can set points to prefer judges who are poorly rated otherwise. So if you're a mutual 1 and you're a mutual 1, but your average pref is a lot worse than hers is, we'll get you, because might as well use the judge who's less likely to fit elsewhere.
Is this written down someplace?
In Perl code.
In the computer. Well, because it's not that I'm not following what you're saying. It's
right.
just that all
it's
of
a lot of details.
And it's not just that. It's really important details about the way.
It's on my list to write it down.
When we were talking about the high school council tournament directors, one thing we were talking about is using mutual preference, and which system of mutual preference you do is not probably as important as being transparent about how your system works.
Yeah.
And right now, I don't know, at least I walked into this room thinking, oh, Green Hill's really transparent about their policy, because they let me know whether or not I want a 1-2 or I'd rather have a 3-3 or whatever. Right. But in reality, if I don't know what those point assignments are, then I don't really know anything. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff I don't know.
And your judges are informed by what priorities they make with other people, because they may prioritize putting a judge that you really want in another debate for some reason, and therefore you don't get access to that judge, and you get a less optimal outcome, right? So.
Which I think is something, I guess that's something I kind of intuitively understood, but you're going through these other criteria, and I'm thinking some of those make sense to me, like how many rounds I owe to the tournament. That's one a criteria that makes sense to me. But then you started naming a couple others, and I was like, I get why they would want to make those worth points, but it's not something I had thought about.
Right.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Please
well,
continue.
and the ratios can vary, right? I mean, you can usually we make mutuality the highest, we make preferred somewhere in there, and most of the others are essentially low enough that they're essentially tiebreakers. They're never going to put a worse preferred judge, but if you have both options, it'll pull one.
And it's still in a certain sense though, does it work on a tiered system? Like at some point it has to kind of say, to assign mutual, what we consider mutual is 1 through 10. Is that set by a tournament director, or is that already built into tab?
No, you could put 12, you could put 15, you could put however many tiers
That's
you want.
what you think constitutes mutual.
Yeah, and it's simply the numerical difference between them. Right. So if you're running a tiered system with 6, you have to crank that mutuality score way high. If you're running an ordinal system, you may need to make it much lower, because their differences are like 30, not 2. So you have to end up adding or subtracting based on that.
Okay.
And then it simply assigns a score to every judge based on every debate. And you would be a 72 for this debate, you would be 115 for this debate, etc. And then it goes through the pairings and it pairs every possibility and picks the lowest scored round. So, and that does mean you still do have to scan it manually, because it's never actually happened to my knowledge, but there is a possibility that it just really screws this one person over in order to save a very minor harm for everybody else. So there's not really I have to come up with a good way to defend against that. And it's, but Bentham gone mad.
Oh, that was awesome.
But so there isn't any real explicit boundary against that, but in practice it just doesn't happen. And so that's how tab room places judges, and it's more or less how systems place judges. One of the issues we've had in high school is that, and particularly in double-flighted rounds, this isn't as true in policy, but it is definitely true in LD, is that TRPC typically does not do a very good job at all of placing judges in a double-flighted round. And so you end up spending a good 15 to 30 minutes essentially repairing the judges by hand in high school LD, which leads to problems of fairness, it leads to problems of time, it leads to all kinds of issues, and is honestly one of the reasons why LD has picked up tab room very quickly, is because it saves 20 to 30 minutes per round, which is appreciable at the end of a tournament. And so because of that, I think we haven't experimented much with MPJ, because we've been having so much trouble simply getting it out the door to begin with. But if we do have a couple new software packages that can handle new things, we can start talking about experimenting with stuff. and do things that are possible automatically are not possible by hand. Such as one of the big things I've always wondered how a tournament like this would function is if you weren't necessarily given any credence to preferencing at all. And it's all mutuality, no preferences, right? And you can go one more, and then you can have as a goal saying you have a 6-round tournament. You have, let's say you have 7 tiers. One's a strike. Get rid of those people. You're going to get 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, and a 6 across the day.
There's
Right?
been a lot of conversation.
They'll all be
on that.
mutual, but you'll, in every debate. So you have to adapt. If you are a, hard right-wing policy plan team, you're going to have to judge you're going to have to debate in front of one of the most project judges ever and see what they think about you debating another hard right, plan team, right, and vice versa. Now, in policy, I think that divide across the prep sheet is mostly, it seems like, ideological. In my world, in LD, it's actually more in terms of experience, right? And so in LD, there's still, at a lot of local tournaments in particular, a core of traditionalist or parent relative newcomer judges. So one of the challenges with that is it's a good idea perhaps ideologically. It becomes more questionable when you put some really top debaters' fate in the hands of somebody who does not flow, right? So that's a potential dissent, and I don't really know the answer for. It could be appropriate at some tournaments and not at others. Who knows? And does that bring people together, or does it give them an excuse to get even angry at each other? I don't know, right?
Does it make a difference in your mind if it's a 6 system or a 9 system or a
probably
ordinal system about the ability? Because I think, I don't know how other people feel, but to me the idea that people would have to, I think the people do their prep sheet, and if they knew that somebody who's really, really far on the left and they're really far on the right, I think they're fine with that if the other team is also very far on the right, and we can't, resolve that dilemma. So that I think that sounds fine to everybody. I do think there's kind of a question of the mutual, depends on how good the judging pool is too. And
well, how low you go.
We get people we both mutually hate, and so we both end up, it's not really, it's a compromise only in the sense that nobody got what they wanted and both sides hate what they got.
Right.
And if you could resolve but that's a bigger,
that I
have
think
good
is a
judges.
question
If you have
of
good
where
judges across the board, then you solve that problem.
I think that's a question you can solve by figuring out where the Mendoza line is, right? If your judge pool can't support it, then you only go down 3 categories or halfway, right? And if you can support it, you go down further. There's still a danger in there. Like, let's say Antonucci came up with this example a couple of years ago, and it made a lot of sense. Say that somebody is a galloping sexist, and a girl team strike him because he is a galloping sexist. A boy team strike him because he is a galloping sexist, and they do not approve of that, and they get him as a mutual judge. Well, the boy team has an advantage, even though all the parties agree that that's a terrible judge, right? So it's not truly mutual.
Well, you were
So
saying
there
that
is-
you should have strikes,
Yeah.
but not necessarily.
Right.
So I think my concern with the line would be, right now you strike a certain percentage of the judges, and then we were talking about how an ordinal system in high school, there might be 20% of the judges you don't know simply because you're at a tournament that's got a huge pool, and that 20% is just, you don't know them. And so for right now, if you're using those categories, I think that system's problematic. If you're not using those categories and you're only using, 1 to 4 or whatever, I think that you can eliminate some of the concerns that you've got there.
And in LD, anyway, a lot of this is directed about the challenge of having quality judges who can flow and stuff. But there's the other thing of training up judges, bringing people to the activity, right? You want some of these people. We have routinely problems where you go into a tournament, mostly regional or local tournaments, where there are a third of your judges who judge every round, and we're constantly chasing after them because they're tired, and then there's a third of the judges who go and they do nothing. And they do nothing until round 4, and there's down and outs that they can judge, and then so that's not very good for increasing the activity. It's not very good for new coaches, especially. How does one become a highly preferred judge if one has no background in debate? I don't know. I can't remember the last time it's been done. I don't know.
And just as a shout out to other parts of our schedule at 8 p.m. on Sunday night, debate as an extension of the high school classroom is definitely, Dana Randall will be here, and that's a really important thing to her about. A part of that is judge professionalization, and we would not put a teacher in a room to teach a class that they knew nothing about and didn't know how to behave in that classroom. And so that, if we resolve that problem, then or we shouldn't anyway. I see her in the but we should not do those things. We may do those things. We should not do those things. I think.
Right.
And I'm confident
And what's the
Dana,
minimum
and Dana
standard?
agrees with me, and that if we did that, if we improve the professionalism of our judging pool, then we would resolve a lot of these problems.
Right.
And we could make that Mendoza line a little bit lower and increase diversity
Right.
of judges.
Right.
Okay, sorry I interrupted.
No, that's, and I'm trying to think if there was anything else major I wanted to talk about. Say, I think largely that's where it is now. I think that's where it's going. I think I speak fairly in saying that tab room is probably the wave of the future when it comes to tabbing both divisions and both tiers, college and high school. The CAT together with it work very well. And I think there is a moment now where we have a new software thing coming online which is more flexible and more able to handle these things, where we can start thinking creatively about what we want MPJ to accomplish versus what it has done to us, without, I think, a whole lot of active consent on the part of high school coaches. I think it came in, it wasn't talked about a great deal, and it just quickly became this competitive reality because it favors the winners, right? People who do well at tournaments tend to do better at tournaments more consistently because of MPJ, because, you know, back when I debated more, there was this element of randomness in the tournament, right? Where, oh, so-and-so is a really good debater, and like the top debater would come in and they're like, and all of a sudden they wouldn't clear. And it was just because they got 2 or 3 judges who violently disliked their style, and they happened to not do well. And now in LD, the types of people who do well would not necessarily have done well under that regime. The types of people who would have done well under that regime, and I know a lot of these kids win round robins all the time and don't win tournaments. And so it's because that's the kind of environment they do well. And so I think curricularly we have chosen to privilege one type of student over the other without ever really having an explicit discussion about it. And that's what I kind of want there to be, is a discussion about it, what we're doing to the tournament, to the skill.
You kind of were leading into that, I thought, when you said that it was sold originally as being about the mutual component of it, but then in reality the reason that many of us like it is because of the preference component of it, which is related to competitive success and our ability to kind of, you know, tailor who judges our debates.
We want a predictable outcome.
And whether or not, and I get that. I mean, from the tournament director's perspective, I have one idea, but the things that the tournament director decides are a good idea. Right. In a when I'm a competitor, I feel completely different about those things. And
well, and the competitive payoff is immediate, and the educational payoff is nebulous and far off, right? And so it's really hard to be able to step back and privilege the educational benefit when that's something that happens a decade later, and we don't really quantify that. Whereas, oh God, the top team in the country that has 33 bids and whatever and has won 6 other tournaments suddenly went 3-3 and dropped. You know, that makes my tournament look awful. Right, and so it's really hard to privilege the one over the other in those kinds of conditions.
About that. So a technical question: is it accurate to say that the tab room currently exists, and if next year at the very first high school tournament of the year I fill it in my prep sheet, I can use that exact in Ordinal, and I can use that exact same prep sheet at the next tournament, and all I have to do is kind of hit a button and it automatically. There's a button that will
yeah. It's not perfect. Sometimes you have to muck around, but it's only within a couple of tiers, and it doesn't know what to do with people you've never
better
read.
as you,
And it doesn't know what to do with people you've
because
not
that
read
is,
before.
I actually think that I'm not positive. I'm not really even for sure that Ordinal is the way to go.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I mean, but I think also that my concerns could be alleviated more by a lot of these other things that we've been talking about. If we agreed that mutual is more important, or those things that are only in code right now, if those were spelled out and we could set a best practices document about what those should look like, then I think I'd feel better about Ordinal. But the reason why it hasn't caught on in high school is because literally just most people are like, I don't want to take time before every tournament doing this. And the marketing plan is you only have to do it once, you know, if you use tab room. So that's part of the marketing for tab room too.
Well, it will also get better. It works better in the college world because the college world is entirely on tab room too. I mean, I thought about doing a thing where it will guess your prep sheet for tiers as well, and I haven't really done it yet because it would not be terribly useful for people, especially outside the Northeast, because it doesn't have half your prep sheets. They're on Joy. and so it can't
Right.
use that data to help. So
For the global.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so even for us, Lexington, we probably go to more tab room tournaments than almost any other debate team, and it still wouldn't help us at Harvard. It wouldn't help, we go to plenty of tournaments that are on Joy even still. So
Right.
yeah.
I have a bunch of questions because I wasn't sure how many people were going to show up, and so I was planning on maybe having to do this interview style. But I don't want to dominate the conversation, so I have a lot of stuff, some of which is kind of out there. So, others?
I just wanted to make a comment,
Okay.
which is that I think you were functionally saying this, but I don't think it got said explicitly, which is that I think that one of the benefits that we got out of having to debate in front of all sorts of different people was adaptation
Yeah.
and a more rhetorically persuasive speaking style that has functionally gone by the wayside to a large extent, even with some of the best debaters, which is, I think, one of the most sorely missing components of our activity right now. And so I would be willing to trade some preference and competitive success to get that back and have kids learn how to talk again and learn how to talk to different people. And I think that one of the things that was a reason that I wanted to have some of these discussions originally was that I think that we are at a moment where we can have these discussions as a community, and particularly in high school, we still talk to each other all the time. There doesn't seem to be a lot of animosity over some of these issues. But if we allow it to keep diverging and keep polarizing in terms of who talks to who and who judges whom at tournaments, I don't know that that's a sustainable thing forever.
Yeah.
So.
And to a large degree, it's hollowed out LD in particular. LD is in this weird place right now. The numbers have shrunk over the last 3 years in LD at almost every tournament that I've done NDCA points for. I started doing the Dukes and Bailey 3 years ago, and since then I've noticed that overall the numbers are going down a little bit. Tournaments will have flash in the pan growth points. Like the Lexington tournament exploded 2 years ago, but that was because the tournament in Florida moved off our weekend and Emory got demoted. So between those two, bid level. So between those two things, so between those two things, we gained half again as many entries, right? But that's not a overall thing. That's just really our tournament.
Appeal is not really more selective.
So and part of the reason, and I think policy coaches don't necessarily know this as well, LD doesn't have a lot of grown-ups in it right now, and a lot of that, my working theory on that, this could be totally nonsense, is that there are people in debate who are okay with a very fast technical style where, sometimes what is, quite honestly, utter nonsense gets debated seriously and around. That is completely implausible, and this is not an ideological statement. Some people find the race performance stuff utter nonsense. I personally find politics just that utter nonsense. That's not how politics works. Okay, and so, whatever. There's the flow is privileged, the drop is made into an incredibly important thing, and therefore if you can establish a drop, it doesn't matter the content of what is dropped, right? That's the style of debate. LD has moved towards that style. It has not, as much as many of you may think, moved into a style that is strictly speaking policy. There's a lot more policy style arguments in debate in LD. There were more of them 5 years ago. It's actually moved away from strict utilitarian debate into more philosophical debate, but it still maintains the speed and it still retains the card focus, and it's content-wise not like policy as much as it was heading towards 5 years ago, but stylistically it's very similar, right? However, LD was founded to be PF. LD was founded to be the alternative for coaches that didn't like fast technical debate and didn't like cutting a lot of cards and didn't like all that stuff originally, and it has no longer been so. So what has happened, I think, is all of the adults who are dedicated to this and doing this as an activity, who are okay with technical debate, are in your camp. They stayed in policy. They have no reason to leave. People who are older and more experienced, and teachers and such, who are in LD, got sick of it and left and went to PF. In between is this just giant gap and that's being filled right now by 19-year-olds. Mm-hmm. So you don't have a whole lot of conscious thought going into what makes a good LD tournament beyond what a highly competitive 19-year-old thinks, mm-hmm. right? And that is where, in our world anyway, a lot of these practices come up, because they're not educationally sound, maybe not. They're not competitively that great, but there'll be a whole lot of 19-year-olds who are willing to come to your tournament if you have them, and that's not a great way to run an activity. So that, rhetorical speaking is almost a demerit in that kind of universe. The best LDer in the country by far this year is Danny Dubois from Harrison. He debates in that style. He's wonderful. I love watching him debate.
You know, there are very few people over the age of 30 who aren't like, oh yeah, Danny's great, I love judging Danny. And we judge him all the time because he doesn't prep 19-year-olds because he doesn't get credit for running really dumb arguments at the speed of light because he doesn't do so. So even though he has won all the tournaments and people recognize that he is good, he is not emulated or admired because he's not using the system and the style that gets you credit. So it's really interesting. I went way far afield on that one, didn't I?
It's okay. So what about the question of, you know, what is the MPJ solution to underrepresented groups other than, you know, it's one of the factors, and that factor can be increased or decreased. Is there anything else to that, or is that part of the problem? Because in theory, if I want using MPJ, Ordinal system, any system, I can kind of just be like 6 and 5 for all of them, even if it's 6. The least, you know, the kind of the 6 rating system, I can still 6 and 5. Everybody that the tournament wants me to have to, you know, is trying to affirmatively place or whatever.
Right.
Is there an MPJ solution to that, or other than?
I tend to think not. I think that MPJ can at best only reflect the preferences of the community and the tournament and the judge pool. And we went through and we tried very hardly to promote the diverse judging at the Coast Swing, both halves of which. And 2 of the impact, one is that there were very few people who could even have an argument to be diverse in hindsight, right? We allowed people to self-define. If the palest, straightest white guy decided to check the diverse box, he was diverse, right?
So
we weren't going to make any judgments. But looking at anybody who was arguably any form of minority, be it gender, race, sexuality, etc., it was still a very low number in the pool. And John did most of this.
They can only judge so many debates.
Right.
Right.
And we had fewer people so identified Fullerton in the second half than did at USC because people realized, I checked that box and I'm never gonna have a round off.
Right.
And you know, so and that's not so good, right?
We had a big NCAA panel about this too, and
Yeah.
somebody pointed out that it was actually on Elam Day it was kind of rewarding the least diverse coaching staffs
Right.
because it meant that all
Right.
white
They
dudes
didn't
were
have
just
to
cutting
judge, they
cards.
could just
Right,
work.
you know, and so it has all these perverse outcomes that aren't necessarily the
Right.
best. I do think that the experiment that they did at the Coast Swing that did do some good was the 5-judge panels. Because I consistently heard in the hallways, oh, I never get to judge like quarters and things like that. And so that was actually pretty good. And that is a wide brush that isn't aimed at any particular group, just simply put more judges into the rounds. So that actually seemed to be okay.
For a couple of years, Wake was just placing judges that were low on the prep sheet as 3rd judges on panels,
Right.
regardless.
Yeah.
Just
They can't control the decision, but you get to say give one, right?
well, they
Yeah.
were just placing people who ordinarily might have been in the 90s or something
Right.
like that because they were
Mutually though?
I believe so.
Yes.
So Michaela was placed on 2 semis panels back-to-back years because at that point she wasn't judging many debates, and they were like, we're just going to expose them to good debates and expose these teams to
That's a
judges
good
that they
idea.
wouldn't normally get. But then the other 2 judges on the panel would have been like mutual ones.
Right.
So they were going a lot lower maybe for the 3rd judge in mutuality, but maintaining a majority of the panel as
That's
high
an interesting
mutuality.
idea. And then new judges get the chance to judge an octo in front of people and give a
Exactly.
decision. And
Right.
yeah.
And the 5-judge option would help that even more because
Right.
then it puts yeah.
So
If it really
And
was a
then
crush that they could
with no strike, not a strike card, just you're gonna have 5 judges and here's your
Yeah.
5 judges.
Yeah, and that was it. And in the ordinal system, there's not really a strike category, but there's a tradition that you don't go below 50 in an Ian debate, and you don't go below 70 in amount of debate. So the 30 or 20% at the bottom are usually considered strikes, even though there's no firm cutoff.
The
So-
tournaments you do usually give advice.
Yeah.
Like they usually will say you can expect that you will get people
Nothing
that
above
disappoint
that.
enough,
Yeah.
and so you prepare appropriately.
And in the system, we actually put that in.
Right.
Like, we put nothing lower than a 50 in there
Yeah.
in our thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Gary said that he agreed with what you said about the limitations of working within the placement system.
Right. Yeah.
In terms of it being able to actually change what happens, because
Ultimately,
people also
if it's
just adjust
mathematically
their
sound.
sheets once they know what the
Yeah.
baseline is too.
Ultimately, if it's mathematically sound, it can only reflect people's prejudices and opinions and whatnot. It can't change them really. So,
That also doesn't
Yeah.
solve you can have nominal diversity tapping the same people over and over again, which happens both in high school and in college.
Right.
So it's like, well, we made sure that we had a woman on every Elam panel, but it's like, the same people judging throughout all of the ELIMs, right?
Right.
So you're not really actually increasing the number of female judges in the pool or the number of female judges in high-level debates or anything. You're just putting the same people in more judges, right? And along those lines, a thought that I had that has very little to do with MPJ, but is related, is that I think the place you have to worry about placing those judges is in novice debates, not in varsity debates. So I don't think I've ever had a junior or senior female who was going to quit because she doesn't see female judges in the semis or in the quarters. But I think I probably have a lot of novices who go through an entire tournament and don't see another girl, and they're just like, I'm done. And you can affirmatively place there without having to worry about preferences at all because you're using varsity debaters. And I think you would have way more of an impact if you made a tournament norm that said something like, half of your judges as a novice will be male and half will be female in the prelims. And we will make an effort to put a female on every novice elim panel or whatever, something to that effect. And similarly with minority judges. I think that would be a bigger impact to keeping kids in the activity, because once they're in as varsity kids and they've already spent a few $1,000s on camp, once they're in,
and they're going to become judges.
They're not
too,
leaving,
so
and they become judges, and it increases your pool. But I don't think any of those kids are quitting because of their panels when they're juniors. I think they're quitting before we even think about it when they're novices.
I wonder if I could build that into the system. Gender balance your judging in a non-pref category.
Speaking of which, if you want coding assistance, and I've emailed you a few times
Yeah,
before.
I'm so bad at responding to email.
There
Everyone
are
in this room can
a
attest
bunch
to
of
how bad I am
computer
at responding
science
to email.
There's a bunch of computer science majors at Georgia Tech just looking for senior design projects, and we can
You know what you need
suggest
to
one
do
them.
is I need to give you my GChat handle because I'm
Okay.
much better at responding to that than I am with
Okay.
email. My inbox is the most horrible place on earth, and once
Yeah.
you go beyond that first screen, you're dead. You're gone. So,
But if you wanted some assistance for the summer, for instance, you got all these ideas in, and like you wanted to just like have 5 people throw a bunch of code at it until it works.
that would be at most excellent, yeah.
What do you?
Over
What is
summer.
the technical? Absent the influx of Georgia Tech computer science majors.
Yeah.
What is your technical / time barrier to creating the system that allows to do a pref sheet for every team versus every other team? So that I would take your original data sheet and then I would have a different one for every other team. So which is the other way to solve your right problem, because I'm perfectly happy. I'm perfectly happy with that left wing judging against all those right wing teams.
Right, but don't want them in front of their favorite as
Exactly.
Yeah.
What's your technical barrier to that?
We've actually had that conversation more than once. Yeah. That's interesting.
You've had not the conversation,
We've
about actually
discussed
doing
this
it.
as an idea.
Yeah.
By the way, debate started like the 2 and R2AR area.
Okay, that's good to know.
The first debates are coming in.
Yeah.
They,
Is that what it is?
well,
They're
the
like
decisions won't be
finishing
for a
them.
while. I still probably got 15, 20
Yeah,
minutes.
you still
Okay, cool.
We gotta go for that time.
Coaches.
Yep.
That's right. We understand.
Responsibilities call. So that's interesting. They did
I
that.
want to talk to you more about that idea. I don't
Okay.
like that idea.
I'll see you at the Starbucks where JP's hanging out for their scouting. Do you know what that is at?
Yeah.
Right, it's right. That's kind of my other spot.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'll
the
see
place
about
that
for
JP
sure.
and I have cordoned off as scouting zone, much to the chagrin of the Starbucks.
They did that at MBA and the LD round robin for the last couple of years.
Really?
Yeah.
They let them do a press sheet against every
We
other
had to
team.
fill out a press sheet for all of our opponents. Yeah, and there was one strike, and then it was press. But they did not pair the panels mutually. What they did is they took out the strikes, and then they would take one judge from one kid's press sheet and one judge from the other kid's press sheet. So you ended up with these very lopsided panels, and it ended up just producing all these 1-1s.
Didn't they also have a thing where it was like you couldn't pref the same judge a 1 for multiple people or something? So you had to make a decision.
I don't remember
that. The one, I could have sworn this was an element of it, because you had to make a decision that you wanted your 1 to be this person against this you wanted to use Judge X as your 1 in this particular debate, not as your 1 in this other debate.
I see.
I don't remember
am I
that,
wrong
but
about
I'm not.
that?
I don't. It's been a while.
I might have
so-
made that up.
Yeah, I thought.
I thought that was a
I think it was more the
constraint.
1 strike thing
Okay.
that we were worried about, because you rating somebody the 1 above a strike did not guarantee you were not going to get that person, because if they were rated high by the other,
That might be right.
that was the imbalance. So I don't think I agreed with how they did it. I think it might have been more of a logistic limitation though, because they were doing it all by hand. It was a round robin, right?
Your technical barrier to creating that system. How much more difficult is that for you to do?
I don't think very difficult. I'm trying to think. What I'm thinking of the potential barrier is entering the data in the first place.
That honestly just makes it 2-dimensional instead of 1-dimensional.
I just have to shave a bunch of pref sheets. It just makes my data tables bigger, and you pull up that pref sheet when you pair the judge.
Yeah,
so honestly,
I guess,
on the end of making the pairing, I don't think it's actually terribly difficult.
I meant the coding side.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. The coding involved in saying, let's assume these pref sheets have been all entered, create me a panel. I think that's easy.
Yeah.
Entering it, building an interface that makes it entering easy, that I can't, I'm having trouble with.
Because like the possibilities is that you basically multiply by the amount of teams you have. So instead of having the square, you add another depth to it, like you add another layer to it. Which, in terms of entering, I don't think there would be any easy way unless you're like
you would have to
copy
at
and
least
paste for
once
everything.
fill this out. You would have to at least once fill out a pref sheet for like all your opponents.
As a
Right, but I could copy it.
Yes, so as a coach,
Right.
you would
So I
have
can
to
copy
have
all
categories in your
90
head.
teams.
Yes.
Because remember,
and then you
from a high
create
school
one for the
perspective,
lefties, one for the righties, one for the people you don't know,
Sure,
and then
whatever.
copy each of those 30 times.
And then if I want to take
And then
the
you
time,
change it as you go.
yeah, if I want to take the time at every tournament to change it for every team,
And
I could,
functionally,
but-
what would happen is you would change it for the top 10 teams in the country, and then everybody else would get the ideological one, right? That's probably what it would end up being.
Yes, but
know?
I mean, it would change at tournaments. It would depend on the field size, but we go to a fair number of tournaments that have between 50 and 80 teams, and teams we haven't debated before, we might think about a little bit, or I mean, but I do think because as we talked about before, the biggest barrier in high school, the ordinal, is just people not wanting to take the time to do it. So this system can only catch on if it can all. It's just easy.
Yeah.
Now it might also interact with. And we'll see what some of the other people that were saying, I want to talk about that, I'm not sure I like that system. Because I think that the system already privileges people who are willing to spend a lot of time on the pref sheet, and this increases that even more. But the offside of that is, I do really, and again, this is just from my perspective, is I do think that there's a lot of people that I think are really good judges, but that depending on, there's just spots. The quarters, we're going to debate in the quarters, we're going to debate this team. And like Paul was saying that, James, Madison, and Towson, and he's going to judge that debate all the time. And it's just, okay, if Towson gets tired of Paul judging that debate, then their only option is to kind of strike him. They can't, and so I do think that that's to me what I think one of the solutions to this is. Now, whether or not it solves the kind of diversity question, that's a little bit different, but I do think that right now, at least, some of the diversity questions are related to ideology, and that the only way that those things are going to be overcome is by people actually having to interact with them. And so right now, I think there's too much of the immediate competitive win creates an incentive to just strike the unknown. And if I had a little bit more selective, if I could say, okay, we're willing to have the unknown against, it might not even be ideology. We have made an arbitrary determination that 50% of the teams at this tournament we will beat no matter what, and we should be good enough. We should be good enough to beat those teams. So we'll take anybody.
You can take a chance.
We all ones. We'll take them all, and we'll take some chances. But we're not going to take some chances in the quarters at a tournament we spent $3,000 to fly to.
Right.
You know what I mean? I think, and so that's kind of now. Having said that, if the technical barrier is very high, then I would totally get that. But that's.
I don't think it is actually. I mean, if honestly all you did is say, here's your pref sheet, here's your first opponent, and then just had a button that said copy this to all of their opponents. Or some sheet where you could just check off who you're copying it to.
This is a quicker question.
Yeah.
So Gary, one of the things I always really liked about the way that Gary talked about it was the ideal tab room system is the one where I hit the button and we print the pairing. How close to that are you now? Because I agree with that too. Is the more that we can take the tab room out of it, the more, where would you say
my
tab room
theory
is on that?
Is somewhere in the next year and a half, we will have the tabless tournament. Because between the online ballot entry and getting the judge placement better, you could have a tournament where everybody gets the
You only have to push the button at the beginning of the
first
tournament.
button. The last ballot comes in round one, and the round auto pairs and just sends out. And then everybody enters their ballots, the round auto pairs and just sends out. And all you need is nags to make sure people go to their rooms. That is the goal.
And that would also then, for the most part, I think, answer my next question, which is tab room knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
And I think Lingel's really good on this and just talking about the, when he's filling out a prep sheet, he just knows what your prep sheet looks like, and
Right.
he knows what my
Right.
prep sheet looks like, and it's nothing he can.
You
It's
can't
not his
unknow
fault.
that.
He can't
You
undo
can't,
that.
yeah.
And I've always thought, I don't spend that much time in tab rooms, but the amount of time that I spend in my own tab room and just at other tournaments kind of randomly, and
Yeah.
you pick up things. And actually a better example is I do something that I think nobody would question in a second, what Shane said when he was here earlier, that as a tournament director, Shane Stafford from Blake,
okay,
from
yeah.
Blake, that he emails people and finds out who are the top 10 prep judges at your tournament so that he can hire them. But once you start, I went a step further, just like send me your TRPC data, and a lot of people have those drop boxes now, and so the access that people kind of
Well, we get a lot through the Baker and the Dave Dukes and
of
Bailey
course,
Brooks.
that's right, and so you just have all that data. There's legitimate reasons for people to have that data, but it does give you a huge competitive advantage.
Yeah.
And in particular, a tab room person who enters prep sheets or looks at prep sheets a lot, and I don't know, maybe you could do this in LD, and maybe even in policy. I don't know, depending on how many tab rooms you've been in. But if I was like, if the debate from this kid that's really good that you were talking about, Harrison,
Danny.
yeah, and he's debating somebody from Harvard Westlake, who's going to judge that debate? Yeah. and so you know that, but maybe there's a different example. You get my point.
Yeah. No, I know exactly what it is.
When you're filling out your prep sheet.
No, it happened at the TOC this year because there were a couple rounds where I was like, actually it happened at that Emory, the Tyler Engler one.
Yeah,
Called it right away.
that
There was
one
a strike card, but that was a strike card.
Yeah.
That was different.
No, but
there are many times where I'm like, oh yeah, we should call Sarah because she's going to get called.
Is there
or something like that? Yeah.
So, in a rudimentary way, the only solution I could think to that is to make prep sheets public.
Right.
Which nobody wants that.
That becomes a whole.
And so, is there a technical solution to that I haven't thought of, or?
Well, one is the tablets tournament, which will be wonderful. It can get to work, and we can trust the system enough. But I think the intermediate step that actually is on my list for the summer is blind pairing. And there's a possibility I could make it so the pairing, when you do adjustments and whatnot, does not contain any names or identifying information whatsoever.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
And
right.
so you see Team 449 hitting Team 649, and Judge 83 is there, and then you can do all the numbers you need to get mutuality without actually knowing who any of the people are.
Cool.
In the Northeast, we have a little tab collective of about 6 of us, any 2 of whom are going to be behind the computer in LD in a given tournament. And we have developed a lot of sort of mental methods to achieve something of the same effect.
Right.
And like TRPC, for instance, when you pull up the list of judges, will not sort them in any order. They come up randomly to replace them. And that we use as a benefit because we always take whoever the first mutual 1-1 fit is. So if there's 3 1-1 fits, we're going to get a mutual one. We're not going to get the one we think is good. And so we do that consciously, just simply to remove ourselves from the process. But that's not to say that we're not sitting there and seeing the big pairing at Yale or Bronx or Lexington or whatever, and being able to see who all the ones and the twos are. You still do know, right?
I have a
and
question.
So that would remove some of that. Yeah.
This is from Stefan.
Well, and actually as an addendum to this, and this is something Mike Beats said before we get to Stefan's comment.
Sure. 1 second, Stefan.
If you do pairing solely anonymized like that, you can do that transparently. And Mike Beats had this image of doing the pairing on a projector in the middle of the cafeteria. So everybody can see what you're doing, but nobody knows who you're actually talking about because it's all anonymized. Now, there's a possibility you could de-anonymize something if there's only 1-3-3 pairing, and then you undo it, and you know I gave my judge a 3, you know they're that one.
Right.
But whatever, like to some degree, the judges won't necessarily know that, right?
So this is probably from 4 minutes ago.
Sure.
There's a 30 second delay on each stream.
Okay.
So Stefan's question is, what about creating a weight based on overall community preference? So for example, if Mahoney is in the top 10% of 80% of the country's prep sheet, can there be a weight similar to affirmative action that favors the better judges based on community preference in certain debates? It means you have to get adaptation, but make sure that good judges are people who good judges are who people have to adapt to.
Yeah, we could do that through the context of the weighting I did for preferring. We actually use it the other way around, which is we pull the judges in who are mutual for a debate that aren't good. But if you just simply made that number negative, it would have the opposite effect. And we could pull in better judges. That would probably be, at least in policy, perceived ideologically, though, right? Because the majority judges will rate some way, and then there's not a good consensus of who is a good judge. It simply is a matter of politics.
It's a community preference problem of what our community preference
define
is
community,
to,
right?
Yes.
In LD, that probably would work decently well. But yeah, it's technically feasible. Thinking through the social ramifications, but it is technically feasible. Yeah, absolutely. So if you wanted to do that, Stephanie, you could.
The thing that I was going to say a few minutes ago actually is related to that, which is that the idea of having, and I could be wrong about this, but it seems to me that if you had prep sheets for different teams, that works if the pool is ideologically neutral.
Right.
But if the pool's ideologically weighted towards one group or another, it seems to skew the advantage to the group that's ideologically in the majority.
Does it though? Because in a way, if say you're a team in the ideological
But they already have that advantage anyway,
I think,
don't they?
I think they do, but I think that you magnify that advantage. I could be wrong about this. That's why I'm asking.
I think.
Well, I don't see how. Like, there's 3 potential debates, right?
Right.
There's mutual one side, mutual the other,
Yeah.
and then the clash.
Sure.
Right? Your mutual one side, on your own side, you don't have to worry about all of the implications of the other thing when you're filling out your prep sheet. So you can do that on straight competence, and you don't have to worry about any ideological, right? The clash, you fill out a very different prep sheet that does that. So I think what you've done is you've removed the impact of being the minority from your same side debates, and you have included them in your clash debates. But in the current world where you only fill out one prep sheet, your clash is embedded in your entire prep sheet.
I guess what I'm thinking
Right.
is if I'm a coach filling out a prep sheet for a team, and I have a team that argues in a style that is favored by 2/3 of the pool, and 1/3 of the pool is not the style that I normally favor.
Right.
And I get this option where I can mix it up, change my prep sheet for whoever.
Sure.
That gives me greater flexibility in a sense. However, if I'm a coach for a team who debates towards that 1/3 as
Yeah.
opposed to the 2/3, I'm forced to put people
But
into.
you already are.
I know that you are.
Yeah.
You already are. But I don't know. I'm just wondering if it's.
I don't think it makes it worse. I
Changes.
don't think it makes it worse than the one thing. It provides less of an advantage to you,
Right.
but it does mean that in some ways no though, because you can have that same prep sheet with all of the teams on the right. The only thing it does is allow you to pick some of the people that you wouldn't ordinarily prefer for ideological reasons to judge you against other people who are in your ideological camp.
Right.
Does that make sense? That's
Yeah.
the
No,
that's
it
the
makes
advantage
sense.
to it, and it then opens up doors for you to decide, oh, you know what, this person, I might actually be willing to take a chance on this judge, even with somebody from the other camp. And
Right.
I don't want to dismiss what you're
No,
saying.
you're
out of
right. I
hand.
have to
My
think about
instinct
it.
is
Think
that
about
it
it.
already is happening, and it can't make it worse. It's already,
Yeah.
it can only make that situation better.
Yeah, I think that's right, but I have to think through the implications.
Because think of it as
Yeah.
it's just 100 that all look exactly the
Yeah.
same. And so, in mine, my sheet's not changing against my ideological opponents. It's
Sure.
going to be exactly the same.
Right.
It's only going to change my sheet against the other side.
Right.
Now, but Paul said he wanted to talk to me about it because he doesn't like it. So we'll.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
This will
No,
be one
I
of
do
those
want
we
to
can
hear
kick
that.
back up.
And I need to
Sure.
think about this more too.
Yeah, I think I have to ponder more. The one idea that's sort of along the same lines of radically changing what preps would mean that I've always had, but I do think there's potential for gaming that I'd have to figure out how to avoid, is why have prep sheets closed before the tournament? I've often wondered what would happen at a tournament where you could edit your prep sheet halfway through.
Right.
And on Tab Room or something,
Oh,
there's
no.
no reason you couldn't do that
The
technically.
biggest, I think,
So-
one of the initial gaming implications of that is
Mhm.
people who've already judged.
Yeah, well, you just take them off the sheet.
No, sorry. I mean, people who have judged people, so I don't want Sarah to judge me when I debate Ricardo.
Right.
And Sarah's already judged Ricardo, and now all of a sudden Sarah's back in play.
But that's good, right? Because
No, I agree that's
yeah.
good, but it is.
It gives
it's-
tab rooms
But it
more
does
options.
mean that I might be even more ideological to start the tournament
Right.
than I am.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That I am already.
And we don't have these ideological issues in Delphi, so I don't think as much about those.
Because
Yeah,
it's
that's
confidence
true.
issues.
Yeah.
Well, I think
But-
the
But it sounds like that.
That
the
opens up an option for a
competence issue
tournament
is the
director.
reason that's awesome though,
Yeah.
because sometimes
You make a
people
mistake.
have an off weekend.
Right.
It's your 5th tournament in a row. You're exhausted.
Kid comes back. I just got judged by so and so. Oh, great. How did it go? He's like, he was incoherent. I think he's drunk. oh, you know, or
Okay, well, that-
Struck for
yeah,
the-
you know,
Right.
exactly.
Like, it
So,
just-
or just tired, or you know, whatever, or you know, it turns out that that really smart judge has a really dumb younger sister, and you know, while she would have been great, she's awful, and I didn't know which was which. You know, it's little mistakes like that, right?
But like for the gaming the system type thing, do you just like go the further step to hire a coach for the sole purpose of messing with that prep sheet every
People do
debate?
that already. It doesn't change it. Just
Well, I
changes their
guess,
job
but-
inside the tournament.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was talking
Yeah.
about on the. You're talking about the if you could have a prep sheet for every team.
Yeah.
And how much time are we gonna spend on a prep sheet?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I will say we already spend a lot of time
Could
on
you
a prep
imagine having the person who's like in charge of the individualized prep sheets that
This is
change
like-
throughout the tournament?
You may have just destroyed somebody with bad OCD's life.
Somebody is
You know,
sitting-
somebody's marriage will fall
Somebody
apart
is
because of this
sitting at the
suggestion.
tournament just constantly moving people from the 7 to the 12.
Yeah, so let's for now table the idea that we can change during the tournament.
Right.
Let's leave that alone. Let's just try this other
yeah.
idea.
I mean, a lot of this
Well,
stuff
that
is-
is also not a technical challenge.
Yeah.
Allowing it to be open
Oh,
during tournament,
sure.
you can do it now if you want to. I've always tried to think through the various ways it could be
With-
gamed.
And it would.
I think you would want to
And
lock.
that's just because it's already all in the system and there's no hand entry
Right.
and all
Yeah.
that stuff.
You'd want to lock any rating for a judge that has judged that team, because you don't want to get like a mutual 3 that you then promote and get to demote them 1 out of just because you happen to get them, right? So say
Why not?
Sarah's,
If I had Sarah
because it
in
removes
round
options
1
from
and
the
she was
tab room.
really, really awesome because it was.
Well,
a
you're not going to
mutual-
get her again.
But we could have her in elims.
That's true. Yeah, you could unlock it after elims.
How many high schools are any of the high schools doing the option of new prep sheets? Is there even any college firms doing that? Like the NDT
I have
is one
not
of the
seen
few,
it.
right?
Yeah, NDT does it, but that's because they changed their pref method. I don't think it's
Right, they
actually.
go to Circle Strike.
Yeah, in elims, I haven't seen it done in a long time, and the
That would
TOCs
be-
do, but only
How are
when
we
it
doing
has
on time
strikes.
for you?
Probably got a couple ballots in. I probably can do another 5-10 minutes.
Because that was kind of I think the last question on my list was about that. Does that help with any of these issues? Does
Yeah, I
that
should leave it about 5
complicate
minutes.
things?
The multiple pref sheet one, or the
Just because I think part of it was I do think that we do selectively. It depends on the quality of your team, but when you have a good team, you think about. We like Ricardo in 90% of instances, but we don't like him in that James Madison Housen debate. And that debate, that's
Right.
where we're going to get it. And so
Right.
we're happy having him in prelims. We just don't want him in the quarters
Right.
in that circumstance. And so I get a new prep sheet, then I can resolve that. And it also cuts back on, I don't know if you'd call this gaming, but maybe it's a little bit of inside knowledge about things that people know about who's going to be there and who's not. Like,
Right.
if I know that Ricardo's not going to be there on Monday, then fine. We're going to prep him. We'll have him during prelims. And if that James Madison
Well-
Housen debate happens, it happens. But we don't have to worry about him being there on Monday. And
Well, ultimately, I think that actually ties into why I've always pushed for cleaner categories, even categories and more of them in preps, which is ultimately the purpose of a prep sheet is to give information to the tab room. And the tab room is supposed to pair their judges based on that. And this kind of a system would give more and better information to the tab room. Because if you fill out one prep sheet for the entire tournament, you are giving information that is muddied. And it's muddied by the ideological concerns that you have to take into account because, oh, I like this judge, but dear God, I'm not going to get him in that debate, and such forth. And so it's not actually a true, clean expression of your preferences against the debate you're having. You're trying to make all these approximations. So by multiplying the pref sheets by the opponents, you're actually giving much better signals to tab, right? And they can use that to give you better, more mutual judging,
right.
right?
Eventually.
And so just as a pure kind of ordinal question,
Too much data.
the ideal.
Never have too much data.
So the concern that people have that ordinal rankings is too powerful. It allows people to make the problem of not having to adapt. Your suggested solution to that is make people debate in front of, pick a number, 50% of the pool, 75% of the pool,
Yeah.
and if that then and the next part of that is you have to have a 1-1, you have to have a 2-2,
Right.
you have to have a 3-3, wherever, the community or your tournament can say, and the tournament should say, the high school tournament council should say, tournaments should use an MPJ system that requires teams to debate in front of 50% of the pool. Is there another part to that, or is that
You could say it that way. The other way you could express it is that your total prefs of your round should total to a certain quota, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because that fits better with ordinals, right?
Yeah.
So you get 6 prelims. Your judges should total to at least a 15 or something, and that will force you to
and
get
that number is set by should you have to debate in front of 50% of the pool, 60% of the pool, or 75% of the pool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Something
That's
like
awesome.
that, yeah.
Anybody else have any other questions?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Yeah,
for
I've obviously
coming in.
thought way
Ricardo,
too
thanks
much
for
about
coming
this.
in and videotaping.
Yeah, this is really cool.
Putting it
And we
on the
apparently
web,
have groupies
so-
because at least Tim Eldreddy and Stefan are watching. So
Yeah, yeah, other people too.
Yeah,
so
so-
that's great. All right, thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Hopefully, we'll see some of you tomorrow.
I will be around.
This was fantastic, Tim. Thank
Yeah,
you for